So, this is me. And at this point, I'm currently an 11th grader who specializes in German. See, in my school, all students are specialized in some kind of foreign language. Some pick up Japanese, some are inclined to French, some pursue Korean. Beautiful, wonderful languages. And I remember a friend of mine who studies Korean once told me a story. Once he was driven back to his hometown to reunite with his grandparents and relatives, and as soon as he got upstairs to his granny's room, who was at the time coincidentally watching a K-drama series, she greeted him with a gracious grin. "Oh, good morning, my sweet little darling. I've just heard you got enrolled in the Korean specialization for high school. Congratulations, good God. Now, can you explain to me what the characters in this film are crying about?" He was like, "Sorry, Granny, I've just woken up, so my sense of hearing isn't activated yet. Just give me a few seconds." And after a few seconds, the emotional scene had ended, but Granny still heard some sobbing sounds around her. And just about right before she opened her mouth to inquire about the eerie situation, he corrected, "Granny, it's me, crying out of misery. I can't translate all that." So, the first thing that comes to my mind when anyone mentions education is practicality. Now, obviously you use what you learn, and considering the other way around, you learn what you potentially use. And what is now happening with the Vietnamese educational system is that it's not always teaching youngsters what's actually feasible for their lives, but rather cramming them with irrelevant, all-encompassing information that would intermittently distract them from the reality. It's like you must wear a thick and heavy armor filled with lethal equipment to run a marathon. Okay, don't get me wrong, I don't underestimate the variety of preparation that life requires from each of us, but the thing is, we are lacking the adequate flexibility to utilize what we are taught. I remember I was in primary school at the time. I was so bubbly, so energetic and curious a kid that I was amused by everything I learned at school, including English. So anytime I went outside, I would just try to detect a random foreign stranger, come right in front of their faces, and make friends. How cute was that? And oh, I love how funny and imaginative idioms are, so I tried to use them as much as I could. Once I met a blonde boy, probably a few years older than me, and after some talking all around the clock, he started telling me how he was flirting with a classmate of his. And how he was extremely determined to hook her up. And I was just trying to show that I was totally on his side with a cheerful exclamation. "Yeah, you must have been balls out for her." And he was like, I asked him what's going on, and he said, "You better keep it a secret." Of course, I didn't get it at the time, but yes, since puberty, I've naturally understood his fear. And fortunately, I figured out the meaning of those tingling feelings in my body by myself. But what about myriads of other curious boys who don't have the access to the right source of information about pubescent alterations and correspondingly don't know how to appropriately deal with them? It is definitely not worth the risk. And in fact, there are hundreds of teenage pregnancy cases in Vietnam every year, and education has to be the one to blame. We are taught some things that we don't ever even use throughout our entire lifetime, yet we aren't given access to legitimate sex education. And the same thing happens to a multitude of other helpful subjects, such as social studies, design, technology, arts, drama, and so on, or topics such as survival skills, social skills, road traffic safety, contemporary prejudices, and etc., which are either not updated, limited, or unapplied within the current traditional scholastic system in Vietnam. Well, there's no doubt that it's now common sense that these contribute to the compulsory skill set that every modern citizen should finally obtain in contemplation of thriving in life. But why are they not doing what's supposedly essential for the youth? Meanwhile, kids are applied pressure to study solely on one or two certain subjects and partake in international competitions in pursuance of gaining more reputation and prestige for the schools they're in, and maybe the families. So again, bringing up the same question but envisaging the panoramic status quo, what is the actual purpose of teaching STUBs in Vietnam today? We are not producing actual human resources that we eventually help the country, but nerds. And trust me, I'm not just an outsider subjectively given this statement. I was in the industry. Yeah, the nerd industry. I fortunately escaped the fate of becoming another product of this industry, and in short, I'm an ex-nerd. Right, I had all the stereotypical traits. I had braces on, I wore glasses that made my grandparents mistake me for their friends. I was an introvert, I was thin, yes, the Pete Davidson thin. I wasn't scared of spiders, snakes, or horror movies, but I was so thin and weak that I was terrified of strong winds. It's not even a joke. That's the one time I went camping with my friends, and we slept outdoors. And the next morning of mine started off with me asking myself, where the hell am I? And the next night I literally slept in the cradle. Back to the nerdy self-depiction, of course. Last but not least, I'm genuinely addicted to academic competitions, and I've achieved hundreds of medals and certificates throughout my younger years in mathematics, English, literature, science, and etc. Come on, at least give me an applause. Really, I'm not flexing, I'm just watch a lot of TED Talks where people jump to the part where they list their achievements and were given huge round of applause. I want to know how that feels. And I reckon that's also the desire that those parents and teachers who are addicted to the showers of praise for the kids. Yeah, as a good kid, who doesn't want to make their parents proud? So my fellow nerds hustled so hard to achieve those shiny things that adults value as pride. But probably if I was the lucky nerd who's destined to make an ideological revolution, at least in that small community of mine. The difference was my parents. They didn't force me to study day and night, but I actually did it by myself and for myself. That's why I was rational enough to discover myself. I know my wants and my needs well, and I actually make decisions about my own life. That's how I effortlessly and naturally became less of a nerd. But before I changed, my fellow nerds and I had together humbled loads of foreign kids and had got famous locally for our achievements. So we were probably the representative nerds in Hanoi at the time. Sounds cool, huh? Forget top G. We were the top N. But the situation struck a lightning real quick to my consciousness. They were in a different circumstance. The schools, the parents, they forced them to study. Their incessant daily schedule was just wake up, have breakfast, study, have lunch, study, have dinner, study, get horny, have a 5-minute self-appreciation session, study, and sleep. And it was a perpetual loop. They didn't do the household chores, so we have the rights to suppose Cardi B is secretly part of the nerd gang too, for her proudly saying, I don't cook, I don't clean. Anyways, they didn't really have valuable social interactions. They didn't have the time to explore new things. They had almost zero depth of characteristics and experiences. And okay, let's say they would be valedictorians of their schools and colleges in the future, but when they are left alone, without any guides, any chaperones, and they must confront people, they must be slapped hard by life hardships, what could they possibly do in response? The thing is, the number of those people are increasing over time and becoming more and more common. I feel lucky I've escaped the industry. Calling Vietnamese education now a nerd-producing industry is, of course, just a sarcastic way to point out some current flaws of the system, yet are common and problematic. Just think, calling it an industry isn't out of pocket at all. You see, education is no more than a service sector. Teachers are providers, students are underage clients who need representatives to do the financial transactions, apparently parents, and the product to be traded is knowledge. In such a trading relationship, everybody expects a win-win situation, but the winning one never wants to stop winning. You see, educators in Vietnam are not sufficiently appreciated, thus the low income. Even heads of school aren't given enough salary to make ends meet, and that's when they need financial bonuses to feed themselves and their families. Therefore, they affiliate with international academic contests in order to get as many students from the schools and classes involved as possible. Once their students are enlisted, they are going to invest in cramming them with tons of information related to a specific subject and getting them ready for the battles. The more medals the students win, the more reputation they get. And since then, although usually they aren't paid considerably more, they can use their reputation to open their own courses and do some regular marketing schemes in order to get as many students as possible and charge them with higher fees in the orthodox schools. Eventually, it becomes their main source of profit, and that's unfortunately the inside of how it works within the Vietnamese educational system for now. The indifference of the government towards the educational sector leaves educators with less choice to make radical changes in the tutoring methods, but to prioritize their own benefits first. And anyway, we can't expect all educators to be so willing to sacrifice that they can think of the nation's future before thinking of what's on the family's plates every meal. That's more of an extremism rather than greatness of an educator, because simply, this is life. Life is harsh. With the lack of support, teaching will gradually become less passionately voluntary, but more of a confrontational duty to teachers, so they care less about their students. They only teach them for the achievements they get, thus the reputation and subsequently the money they get. They stop being creative in the way of teaching. Even today, I went to school each week and experienced some periods where we spend the entire time writing stuffs that we don't even understand down our notebooks. People yawning and sleeping all the time in their own arms on the table, but teachers don't even know their names to tell them to get up. We aren't truly inspired. And studying also contagiously becomes confrontational as much as teaching does. Precious students, the people with least capability of turning the tables and taking the lead of the dilemma, are, ironically, the victim of what's so-called education. As a defense mechanism, representatives of the field make lists of achievements that Vietnamese students get in international contests, but forget that Vietnam is currently ranked 70th on the global GDP rankings, and 1/4 of this 100 million population country earns under $5 per day. Who's going to run energy plants? Who's going to run trade enterprises? Who's going to bust criminals? Because children are the seeds of the future, and education plays the role of planting them. After all, with this much lack of essential variety and practical preparation, society is suffering, and is going to suffer considerably more within the next few years. How scary a prospect is it? Now, let's have a talk about solutions. On the sunny side, loads of projects and clubs centralizing social values have been established and have attracted a lot of youngsters. Hence, not just bolstering their individual skill set, but also contributing to the society. Frankly, most of the veritably influential ones are spearheaded by students themselves. And that's why they definitely don't stand a chance of becoming a long-term solution for this, by virtue of their spontaneous and desultory nature. Though they are trailblazing, they are just masquerading as a shortcut in the labyrinth. They are not enduring and systematic enough, and will die out in alienation without legitimate aid from educators, on the grounds that youngsters who are deeply aware of the need to bring up such modern topics and actually make a change by founding projects or communities like so are really scarce. And educational officials aren't just scarecrows, right? At least, thanks to such talented individuals, a bold of idea might spark for the educational sector. Adults are the ones with usually more involvement, more wealth, and more rights to create even more diverse environments for teenagers to undergo. Not just meaningful projects for the community that are more subsidized, more funded, and more technically supported, they can provide with philanthropic experiences, internship chances, and such like. But extracurricular activities are not sufficient. We spend 8 hours a day, 1/3 of our day in class, and we shouldn't waste a second of so fatiguing a schedule. Orientation periods, social studies periods, apprenticeship choices in school, soft skill lessons, and real PE. Yes, real ones, because, well, this might sound weird, but we aren't actually obliged to regularly exercise during our current PE lessons in most schools, and are not physically benefiting from them. Let's have these lessons in schools, and I guarantee that we, students, are going to be thrilled as we know that we see how impactful and how useful these knowledges are. We know we have to communicate and work with people every day. We know we have to make use of our physicality every day. We know we have to gain job experience and do an actual job one day. We know we are going to use them for almost our entire lifetime. I agree that some mathematics, some physics are needed to develop our logical thinking, but other than professors and researchers, tell me, who the heck really ever uses derivative and Bose-Einstein distribution law all the time? And teachers, you have one job: teach. Teaching doesn't only mean giving knowledge. Teaching is also training. You can't train somebody you don't know well. So get to know your students, their personalities, their characteristics, their interests, their wishes, their dreams, their strengths, their weaknesses. Make friends with your students. Make yourself trustworthy and dependable. Show wisdom, don't just tell. Yes, I know it's hard. It means a lot of both physical and intellectual work, and that's why it's in most countries as conceptions. Teaching is one of the most highly valued and respected jobs. That's why teachers should be trained not only in wisdom, but also the purest idea of the educational duties. And that's why the government should support them financially. That's a huge source of motivation for teachers as laborers. That's a vital instrument to actualize new ideas. Oh, and new ideas. Where to find new ideas? That's the reason why chiefs and the officials of the educational department are in the office every day. They can't just supply opportunities for students by getting bribes. I mean, it should never happen, of course, but they are called the heads for a specific reason. They are supposed to think, actually think. They are more experienced in life, and they should use that plus what they learn and comprehend from their points of view towards modern society to teach their students new and essential knowledge for today, rather than leaving all the job to the distorted and overflowed internet. Everything starts with awareness, and as soon as the highest people are really touched deep down in their hearts, the educational is the future of the country, the pride of the nation, the key to globalization, the medium of wisdom. Then, the Vietnamese educational system, I believe, would live up to the expectations that have been concocted for these talented, potential, energetic young generations of the nation for a long, long time. It's been an honor being here, and thank you for listening.